power purchase agreements for energy efficiency. With us is Rachel McCafferty, Project Development Manager at MEPS Energy. Rachel has a background in energy efficiency, renewables, and project finance. She works with customers to finance and implement energy efficiency projects via the MEPS Efficiency as a service solution. Rachel, are you on?
Hey, Josh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for the introduction. It is great to be participating in the Midwest Policy Series on energy efficiency, and I'm excited for the discussion today. As Josh mentioned, my name is Rachel McCafferty, and I'm a Project Development Manager at MEPS, which is a leader in the efficiency as a service space. And I help energy users identify financing opportunities for energy and water efficiency projects. And so obviously, the benefits of implementing energy efficiency are fairly well known, but today I was asked to share more about the financing options, specifically what's known in the market as efficiency as a service. But we like to really position it as a really similar solution to a PPA, but extending that out to various different energy and water efficiency measures. And so there's lots of different names for this type of financing model, and the market's still really developing some standardization on the nomenclature, but the model itself is something that's been around for some time, and there are some specific differences, which I'll share from other forms of financing that you might be familiar with. And I also will share some examples with you on the types of equipment we finance and what kind of facility types are best suited for this type of financing model. So with that, the next slide, please. So I thought it would first be helpful to share more about MEPS and provide just a high-level overview on our experience and perspective on the as-a-service market. So MEPS has been in operation for 12 years, and we're headquartered in San Francisco, California. We are an energy efficiency finance company, and we help customers implement multi-measure energy and water efficiency projects. And this is all at no upfront cost via what we call our SDSA, or Sustainable Energy Services Agreement. And so in this model, MEPS owns, installs, operates, and maintains the equipment, and we pay for 100% of the upfront cost, so customers see savings from day one of operations with no financial investment. We also provide a performance guarantee on these projects, so not only are we taking on the financial upfront risk, but we also take on the performance risk as well. Customers who are leveraging this type of financing include colleges, hospitals, municipalities, manufacturing. So it's a pretty broad mix of folks who are leveraging this type of financing. And we work with leading energy services companies to actually implement the project. And I'll talk a bit more about what that looks like. So if you go to the next slide, I thought it'd be good to sort of share the evolution of the as-a-service model, because even if you might not have heard of efficiency as a service before, you're probably pretty familiar with this model in the energy space. So the concept of the as-a-service model is pretty common, and it was first really demonstrated via traditional efficient energy performance contracts that were typically provided by ESCO companies, energy services companies. And the traditional scope would include the design, development, and implementation of these projects, paired with a performance contract with a performance guarantee on the savings. And this model's also been proven in the renewable space with the widespread use of the PPA, or power purchase agreements, where customers are paying based on the energy produced by their PV and not the solar panel itself. So The energy or efficiency as a service model is essentially the same contract structure as a PPA, but the calculations are based off of energy saved versus power energy generated. And really, this model's been at the intersection of just what as a service means, really where you don't need to own the infrastructure. You just get the benefits of the new equipment and savings that it generates. And so we see the growth of opportunities and increased customer interest in this market. And it's really giving folks and energy users the option to do more projects at scale and to roll them out faster than if they were to use their own capital. Or if they have limitations on what they can use their own capital for. For example, they have strict payback or ROI requirements, but there's a ton of deferred maintenance that doesn't meet those internal thresholds. This is a really good option to get those types of projects done. So if you go to the next slide, so I wanted to share a bit more about the market for this type of model. As we've seen that it's grown significantly, even since I've been at Metris for the last year and a half, and even over the last 6 months, we have seen more formal solicitations looking for this kind of financing, both in the public sector and commercial space. And so, as you can see, market research is projecting that in North America, the as-a-service model will expand to roughly $12 billion by 2029 and over $27 billion globally. So this is really a financing mechanism that already has legs. It's established and out in the market today, and we're certainly anticipating a ton of growth in the as-a-service market over the next decade. So if you go to the next slide, I wanted to share a bit more of the specifics of the as-a-service model, specifically the Metris solution, which we call our SDSA or Sustainable Energy Services Agreement. So again, in this model, Metris provides a turnkey approach, which includes all of the services required to implement energy efficiency projects, including the design, development, financing, and construction, as well as the ongoing services like O&M and measurement and verification. And this is all sitting within a single contract structure. And so Metris, or the financier, will take ownership of this equipment and then bill the customer for the savings generated by the equipment over the course of the term. And I think it's important to note some key differences, especially from traditional financing like a lease or a loan. And the main differences being that Metris will bill based, or the financier will bill based on the actual savings achieved. So the customer is only going to be paying based on the performance of the project. And it's really this variability in payment and this pay for performance model that allows for this contract structure to be deemed as off balance sheet. And that's something that's specifically been stipulated under FASB and GASB accounting standards. And so customers don't have to take on any debt to their balance sheet to implement this type of financing. It doesn't impact their credit rating. It doesn't impact your property taxes, like other forms of financing. So it's, pretty great model for folks that might be debt adverse. And so I'd say the other sort of the key takeaways for the SDSA or the as-a-service model in general to remember is that there needs to be equipment that a third-party financier can own, so we can monitor and verify the performance. And then also the equipment does need to generate enough savings to support a cash flow neutral or positive outcome. So those are some important things to note when it comes to these types of projects. So if you go to the next slide, please. When we think of the benefits of leveraging the as-a-service model or the PPA model for energy efficiency projects, I really like to think of them in two ways, both financial and operational. From a financial perspective, I've touched on some of these already, but as I mentioned, the key benefit being is that you don't need to use your own capital to implement these projects. And the reason customers really like this solution, especially if you are public sector or maybe just debt sensitive, is we're finding that customers, where they could initially self-fund these projects because they could raise funds or they have the budget to do so, there's certainly a lot of uncertainty around budgets right now, especially with COVID and how that's impacted operational costs. And so there's really a need to reduce operational costs, and the SDSA is a really good way to do that. It's, you know, different than other types of loans or leases. It's because in these scenarios, the customer is still taking on debt, and there's a hell or high water payment typically in those models. So that's another key difference. And then we also, again, take the risk out of these projects for customers, because you're not only paying based on how, you're really only paying based on how the project performs, and we're also providing a performance guarantee. So it's a pretty good solution depending on sort of what your risk tolerance is. And if you go, and then from an operational perspective, we provide a turnkey approach that includes the delivery of the technology and the financial services together in a single contract, a single solution. So that's, I think, certainly much less of an administrative burden than maybe other contract forms or financing forms for these types of projects. We also, again, manage the ongoing maintenance of projects along with the measurement and verification to validate the savings generated. So we're also providing transparency to customers on the performance of the project over term, because that's pretty critical to us, as that's how the billing structure works. And I'd say also the SDSA and the as-a-service model isn't as limited as other forms of financing. And what I mean by that is we can really fund an initial series of projects under this contract structure, but then as customers' facilities change or evolve, or as the technology improves, we can roll in new upgrades and changes into the existing contract. And customers really appreciate that flexibility, because as we know, things change pretty quickly when it comes to energy. So the next slide, please. And as I mentioned earlier, we deliver these contracts through energy services companies. And so I thought it was really important to highlight the importance of the ESCO in this process. So not only is the ESCO actually doing the construction and installation of these projects on behalf of the financier, but prior to that, they're also going in and doing an investment grade audit of your facilities to determine the scope and the savings. So the savings we base the contract on are actually based off of your operational data. And the ESCO conducts this. So they're a really critical part of the process for the delivery for the as-a-service model. And so I thought it would also be good to share sort of what the governing contracts are for this type of structure. So the first and primary contract is the SDSA, and this is where METRIS or the financier will contract directly with the customer. And the SDSA is a master services style contract that can cover various customer sites for multi-site opportunities or multiple measures for a single site. And it has a set of standard terms along with project-specific exhibits that detail the equipment information, warranties, site location information, details on how the savings will be measured and verified, and what's the expected energy savings on an annual basis. And so in parallel to when the financier signs the contract directly with the customer, the financier is also entering into an ESPC, or an energy services performance contract, with the ESCO partner to actually deliver the work. And so the ESDC contract covers standard things like construction, design, installation, along with the maintenance scope, ongoing monitoring, all of the things that make the SDSA unique. And the ESPC is typically signed simultaneously upon executing the contract with the customer. And so those exhibits and scope and equipment information, those two documents really mirror each other. So that's sort of what the contract structure looks like in a typical as a service scenario. Next slide, please. And so I thought it's pretty critical to share what a typical project profile looks like for this kind of financing model, because I think it definitely is a differentiator compared to other forms of financing. In terms of the type of equipment, anything that uses energy or water or gas, typically we can finance. The main criteria we evaluate to determine if a project is feasible comes down to a couple key points, specifically the utility rate or spend for the customer, what incentive programs are available that the financier can leverage, and also what the customer credit rating is. Of course, like I mentioned before, it doesn't sit on their balance sheet, so this structure doesn't impact the end customer credit rating, but it's critical for us to understand, since we're entering into these long-term service style agreement, what the credit worthiness is of the customer. So that's really sort of how the key criteria. In terms of project size, we typically target projects between the $1 million and $20 million range. I'd say the average project sizes are closer to 3 and 5 million. And typically these projects bundle together different types of upgrades across various sites and then wrap them under one single financing piece. And so the benefit of targeting multi-site projects is that, let's say you have a facility with a lower energy rate or it has a less attractive cash flow, and then you're able to combine that with a site with a higher utility rate or richer incentives. Suddenly a site that wasn't financeable on its own will now work under this structure. And in the case of a single site project, we typically look to bundle different types of upgrades together to get the weighted average payback we need. And we typically target a 7 to 10 year simple payback to fit it within a standard SDSA term. Typically the projects and contract term lengths, I'd say, are between 7 and 15 years, but I'd say the average contract term length that we see is closer to 10 years. We certainly can extend those term lengths out longer to 20 years as needed for customers with projects with maybe a longer payback, or maybe the equipment has a longer life cycle. I think a good example of this is something like solar. So next slide, please. And in terms of the actual specific measures we finance, I thought it was important to demonstrate sort of what the standard equipment that falls into the structure looks like. It can be various different measures, as I mentioned before. Some ones that are pretty common include LED lighting and controls, as well as air conditioning and HVAC retrofits or upgrades. It also includes things like building envelope improvements. We're seeing a ton of deferred maintenance in customer facilities around their boiler and chiller units. And so those are pretty popular target projects as well that we're seeing in the market. And then additionally, being able to wrap in renewables under this financing and contract structure as well, from solar to energy storage and even EV charging. So it's a pretty diverse mix of measures that we target. Currently, we support a portfolio of over 30 different energy efficiency measures and water efficiency measures. So, and those are demonstrated here, some of those. And there are some vendors in this space who may offer only lighting as a service, where they only do LED upgrades and controls, or maybe they only offer renewables under this contract structure, which would essentially just be a standard PPA. But in the case of the SDSA or a true as a service model, we're really looking for multi-measure opportunities to bring more value to the customer, and also giving you the opportunity to have your facilities audited and identify projects that aren't just going to yield the fastest payback, but really target upgrades that are the highest priority, whether it's aging infrastructure or you have savings targets you need to hit and no budget to do that. So it's really a good way to build a custom and bespoke program that's best suited for you and your facilities. And with that, I believe that's my last slide. Great. So I'm not sure if there's questions. Happy to address those.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rachel. Very, very intriguing. There are a couple of questions from the audience. Still encourage folks to provide those if you have them. But one question was, does Metris finance EV infrastructure for like a municipality or something?
We certainly do. Our typical project approach isn't to just do standalone EV charging. So we'd like to pair that with other efficiency measures to really bring the value of the SDSA. But EV charging is certainly in our wheelhouse. And it's something that we're seeing much more demand for, especially for cities and municipalities.
On an efficiency component, I could see to where you have an expected, or even on renewables, right? You have an expected output, expected savings for an EV infrastructure. What's that baseline?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And this is really why Metris likes to partner with energy services companies, because they're pretty good at establishing those baselines and accounting for changes like how COVID may have impacted consumption. So we really look to our ESCO partners to, and also go through a pretty rigorous interview process with our customers to really understand the operations of their facilities. That includes things like operating hours. We can certainly talk about how COVID may have affected that consumption. And then I think the key sort of message being that we develop a baseline that considers the customer's input. So that's really the approach we take, where it's much more consultative. And again, since we are providing a performance guarantee, we are trying to base these metrics off of actual data. So I'd say we typically fall within a pretty small percentage of error when it comes to calculating the baseline. And most of our projects, I'd say actually all of our projects overperform from the baselines we set. I think our portfolio average is around 105%.
Okay, great. One question we have is, how rigorous is your methodology for establishing baseline pre-project energy usage and current operating procedures? You kind of
I think that's what I addressed in the question, or the answer that I provided. So it's essentially sort of the same answer. It's really taking a consultative approach, drilling into operating hours, drilling into historical data, and working to build a baseline that is real, right? Since we are guaranteeing those savings. We've got skin in the game there.
Okay. And how would you say, and you might have addressed this, but one more time, how does this mechanism differ from a traditional performance contract?
It really is the turnkey approach. I think that's the big differentiator where you're setting one contract that includes the financing and the delivery of the services. Whereas in a lot of instances, customers may be, securing bond measures to finance the project and then just paying cash for a performance contract. Or they're having to go and get maybe a tax exempt lease. And there's a bit more of administrative overhead. The fact that, there's a single contract structure that covers both the delivery of the services and the financing, I think is a big differentiator.
Gotcha. Great. I believe those are all the questions that we have received. Rachel, I thank you so much for presenting this. It was very interesting. I hope everybody found that useful. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to make? Or?
No, just that I really appreciate being included in the conversation today. There's been lots of good talks around financing energy efficiency projects. So if folks on the call have questions, please feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is available there, and we can talk in more detail. So I appreciate being included.
Absolutely. Thank you. That does conclude our Midwest Energy Policy Series on energy efficiency. We do have dates for the Midwest Energy Policy Series on economic development. That is December 8th and 9th. If you're still in the development of a agenda, there are particular topics you'd like to see us address, don't hesitate to contact myself or Travis. It can't go without saying is that this event and this series especially cannot occur without our sponsors. So thank you, the Columbia Water and Light, the Nature Conservancy, Evergy, Liberty Utilities, Spire, Missourians for a Balanced Energy Future, RTO Insider, and the Building Performance Association. Thank you, Travis and MEI staff, for all your great work and working with the speakers. Thank you, all the speakers. Definitely couldn't have done it without this very interesting stuff. Again, we will be sending out a survey. Please fill that out. We'll get you the video right away. These videos will be up later for those that don't do the survey. And we greatly thank you. If you have any questions or thoughts or comments on how we can do this better or differently, please do not hesitate to let us know. Again, thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your Friday and a great August. Best.